Anywhere you go, you're just yourself. And if you don't change yourself, you're just yourself with those things, you know?
Jimmy spent years lost in crystal meth psychosis. Today, he's 12 years sober.
So I take all this raw meat and I go into the bathroom and I turn on the shower and I take all this raw meat with me into the shower. That type of behavior and that type of delusion was not isolated. It was all day, every day. My parents, they were waiting for a phone call every night.
After landing in prison again and again, Jimmy finally found some clarity. And in that clarity, he made a decision.
I realized I actually had to implement something into my thought process that was going to keep me from doing drugs. It wasn't just going to be environmental. It wasn't just going to be knowing better. In those moments where those thoughts first arise, being able to stop the thoughts, knowing what it's going to lead to, and replacing it with the truth and not a fantasy. Once I learned that, it became second nature.
In this episode, I talked to Jimmy about why he ended up so lost in psychosis, how he changed his thoughts despite the unrelenting pull of crystal meth addiction, and how he maintains his recovery despite all life's challenges. Jimmy talked about drug use in some pretty triggering ways, so if you're new or if you're struggling, please be prepared for that. But before we get into it, what's up? My name's Dan, podcaster, keynote speaker, and advocate, and this is Hard Knocks Talks, your addictions podcast. We want to hear your thoughts. Make sure you leave us a comment and let us know what you learned in this episode, how it made you feel, or whatever. We foster productive conversations about substance use, and we can't do it alone. So with that, let's get into it.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
What's up, man? How you doing?
What's up, Daniel? How are you, buddy?
I'm doing good. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for toughing out the tech struggles and for saying a little prayer to the tech gods and hoping that we get through this hour. I appreciate your tenacity, man. That's awesome. So
yeah, it's always sucks when you're trying to just have a conversation and now you got tech issues in the back of your head at the same time.
Yeah, no kidding. So I found you on Instagram. Your tagline here is "Follow me for a good time," and you're pretty funny, man. I got to admit, like some of the shorts that you do, they really resonated with me. That one in particular, you're sitting there, or you're covered up in a blanket, and you've got the white powder all over your face, and you can hear the birds chirping, and your heart is racing. You're like, Trish trying to party, and like, man, I don't know how many nights I've been there. Like I've been there so many times. And in fact, like the birds work their way into a lot of my social media posts, like my memes and stuff, because like everybody who's had a problem knows what it's like when you're like, you go hard until 3-4 o'clock in the morning and then everything shuts down and you're still racing and you got to listen to the birds judge you on your way home. So, having said all that, why don't you tell us a little bit about you? Like, how did this get started? How did you gain all these lived experiences? Was this something you grew up in, or did you come across it later in life?
Well, going back to that video resonating with you. So someone asked me somewhat recently. They're like, "Hey, man, these videos are funny. How do you come up with all these ideas?" And I'm like, "I don't come up with any of these ideas. All of this stuff actually happened, you know, like as far as like the parasite delusions and like that video, your heart racing and the birds chirping at 9 a.m. Like pretty much everything I've put on my social so far has all been actual things that I've experienced, even if it seems like some crazy, absurd concept where you're like, oh, this is just a funny thing you thought of. It's like, no, that really happened. Like I was really taking apart a power tool in a stolen Honda Civic at 3 a.m. in some random neighborhood.
Trying to figure out how to charge your cell phone.
Yeah. Looking for a payphone. I mean, back then I was just on payphones, but
yeah.
I mean, I started. I mean, going back to how I ended up sober or strung out in the first place. I mean, it was a gradual thing for me. I don't really come from a troubled household or anything like that. I think my biggest issue was maybe just some sort of chemical imbalance that I was, congenital, something I was born with, inability to manage emotions. And I mean, as far as I could remember back, I've had an issue being able to manage my own emotions from birth, it seems like.
Yeah.
You know, so as I got older and I learned about, you know, substance, the inability to manage emotions kind of goes hand in hand with substance abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
So it was gradual, you know. It was like marijuana and alcohol,
Uh,
pills, and
mhm.
then as you progress, you're like, oh well, my inability to manage emotions, you know, goes great with weed, and then you find out like, oh, it goes even better with weed and alcohol,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
oh, you know, throw pills in there, it's even better, and then all of a sudden, then you meet the final boss, and you're like, oh, my emotional problems go great with crystal meth. Let's just, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. That,
ride that
that
out.
that reminds me of the another one of your reels I saw when you were like having a relationship with a meth pipe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was, that was good, man. And I can relate with what you're saying. I think that that's what happens to a lot of us. That's certainly what happened to me the first time I got drunk. It was like a warm blanket was put over me. But marijuana was a different story for me. Like I did it once and it was awesome. And every time after that I did it, it just gave me crippling anxiety. But I figured I thought I could figure it out. So I did marijuana for like probably a solid 10 years, thinking that every time I was going to figure out how to not be crippled with anxiety when I did it. But like,
Oh
what was
yeah, that
the,
was a
go ahead.
reoccurring theme with me and weed as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So what
also
was
going back, the understanding of me saying I was using substances because I didn't know how to control myself emotionally. That wasn't something I realized until I was already years sober.
mhm.
Like as I was using drugs and getting wrapped into substances, whatever it might have been, I wasn't conscious of what I was running from or why I was doing it. I was just doing it, you know. And then once I had some time sober, I was able to kind of go back and reevaluate like what was it that was driving me towards these substances and abuse and all that, you know.
Mhm. So was there any conversations growing up? Like drugs are bad. You know, a lot of people talk about Nancy Reagan, and how, and in fact, I've had people say that Nancy Reagan introduced them to drugs by saying drugs are bad. So they wanted to check it out for themselves. But like when you were coming into these different substances, was there like a time where you were like, I shouldn't be doing this? Or was it just like, as soon as it revealed itself, you gobbled it up as fast as you could?
Oh, I knew better. Like I said, I wasn't raised in a broken home. My dad is sober. My dad's a recovering addict, and he got sober, which is fucked up that he got sober when I was a kid for me.
Hmm.
So I wasn't raised in a house where abusing drugs or alcohol or any of that was okay. You know, so I've known my whole life that it's not the path to take, you know.
Hmm. Hmm. So,
Which I mean, my dad's not a program guy, but I've my first NA meeting I ever went to, I was 16 years old with
oh
my
wow.
dad
Were you there
when I
because
was
you
already struggling with drugs.
did you realize at that time, like, was that your doing? You're like, Dad, I got a problem, take me to a meeting? Or was this something that your dad like imposed on you?
Something my dad imposed on me, you know, it was
Hmm.
kind of like last ditch effort or first ditch effort, you know, type deal where
Hmm.
I was already struggling with narcotics when I was like 16 years old.
Hmm.
So
And
we went to a meeting.
and what did life look like? Like, what were the warning signs that your parents are wanting you to go to meetings?
Well, the first time I went to rehab, I was 17 years old, and I don't know if they knew about the cocaine yet. I want to say I started doing cocaine when I was 16, which was easier to hide. It wasn't as obvious, you know,
Hmm.
because how much cocaine can you really get as a 16-year-old, you know? But
Depends on
once
your budget, I
I,
guess.
yeah, yeah. Well, I wasn't a rich 16-year-old.
Mm.
But once I started doing crystal meth, it was hard for me to hide. I think probably within the first month, I
Hmm.
was already selling my stuff, and my parents were finding pipes in my room and stuff like that. So it was pretty obvious. But actually, the first time I went to rehab wasn't even for meth. It was for um, I was abusing over-the-counter cough medicine. I don't know if you're familiar with that or if that ever caught on in Saskatchewan.
Oh yes, we know how to abuse things up here very well.
Yeah.
Everything from
Yeah,
over
so
the
there's
counter stuff to solvents to all the things. Yes.
yeah. So not to educate anyone on how to abuse it, but over-the-counter cough medicine has a chemical in it that um, called dextromethorphan hydrobromide,
Mm-hmm.
where that chemical it's a cough suppressant, but once it's taken in a larger dose, it becomes dissociative.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned about that, and that was my first real the when I actually got submerged in
Mm-hmm.
substance abuse. That was my first chemical.
I listened to another podcast you were on a little while ago, and you were telling all kinds of crazy stories. Like when did the insanity really start setting in? Was it early on, or did that take hold later in your 20s, or what?
Um, that's interesting also because my insanity dates back before my substance abuse. My
Mm,
substance abuse just amplified it.
mm,
So I've been in the insanity for as far back as I can remember, with peaks and troughs and spikes and craziness. But once I started abusing substances, it just went crazy. But I was living on the street when I got sober. I was a streetwalker. I was sleeping outside. I was one of those guys you see walking down the street where you couldn't comprehend them living another life. Like sometimes I'd have two different shoes on and I'd be spinning a lighter in my hand, like just in some psychotic state, and
mm,
just, you know, committing crimes and just,
yeah. What did your parents say? Like, at what point did you have to? Did you like get kicked out of the family home? Did you leave? Did you graduate high school? Like, what did that look like to you?
so I was probably about 4 months to graduating high school. And that's when I started smoking crystal meth,
Mm,
and I just stopped going to school. It was school was just really getting in the way of my drug use. And then I think I stopped doing meth maybe for a year, sometime around that time, and then I had started doing it again. But my parents kicked me out and got a restraining order on me when I was probably 21, around
mm,
that time.
mm-hmm.
Rightfully so. I started getting, I mean, obviously there's the theft where I'm just stealing anything of value in my parents' house, with no not taking anything into account, like wedding rings, baby rings, my dad's tools that he was actively using in his career, and like 40 bucks, 40 bucks, 40, whatever.
Mm,
I didn't have a conscience when it came to stealing stuff from people.
mm-hmm.
So they kicked me out. And then that was also paired with, I would get real bad delusions, from maybe underlying situations, but also, sleep deprivation, malnourishment, all the cool things that come with crystal meth abuse. I would go in these full blown psychotic delusion states where I'm like, the whole thing, the parasites, the
Yeah.
voices, the, government conspiracies, the works. And I would put people in compromising situations, where my emotions so volatile that to be around me was a liability. So it got to the point where my parents just got a restraining order on me and kicked me out.
Yeah. And what happened then? Like, what was that any sort of clue to you, or did you just continue on the street?
Oh, that didn't, that, it was interesting because I always knew what I was doing was wrong.
Mm,
I was never, and maybe it was a blessing in disguise. I was always in my active addiction, completely conscious of what I was doing being wrong. I wasn't in, because from my understanding, I feel like a lot of people who come from those broken homes or come from a world of substance abuse, you know, like their dad and mom are crystal meth users, and going to prison is like a rite of passage, and that's
Yeah.
just they're like, that's just what life is. You do drugs, you commit crimes, you go to prison, you get out, you do drugs, you know,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
they're in the addiction of the drug, um, with no other option in their head, you know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was always in my addiction aware, like, I'm strung out right now, I'm addicted to this drug. I'm not supposed to be robbing houses, I'm not supposed to be going to mental hospitals, you know. Like,
Hmm.
it was almost like I was experiencing this traumatic situation, like in a
As
third
it
person.
unfurled, like
Yeah, yeah, like it
watching from the
was.
outside kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned that you started going to meetings at 16 years old. Did you ever have any times in your life before this final time? I mean, you're 12 years into your recovery right now. Um, I'm wondering, did you have any stints of recovery before that maybe didn't stick?
No, so I started smoking weed um, in eighth grade, whenever that is. So from the time I was in eighth grade till the time I got sober in 2012, when I was 23, um, I was on some sort of substance, whether it was a more simple thing like weed,
Mm,
or robbing houses high on crystal meth. From day one of smoking weed to the first time till the end of my thing, I was on something every single day.
wow. Um, so what did it then for you? I mean, it sounds like you've had some pretty crazy experiences. Why don't you tell us a bit about some of those experiences that sort of clued you in finally?
Um, so at the end, like I was saying, like my psychosis was really bad. It wasn't even reasonable. To be paranoid that the government was following you is a more
Hmm.
reasonable psychosis than the shit that I was experiencing.
Hmm. So
You
there's a
know, I had.
benchmark. There's a benchmark of psychosis. Like this is reasonable and this is unreasonable.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you're talking about the government, at least you're talking about things that exist.
Okay,
You
that's
know,
fair. Yeah, yeah,
the government exists. Spying does exist.
yeah. That's true.
Conspiracies do exist. The shit I was wrapped up in wasn't even shit that had ground to stand on.
Uh huh.
You know,
Yeah.
so that was an ongoing thing. Like, I sometimes I'd be in the same psychosis for weeks or months, you know,
Hmm.
where it was like this weird, it sounds crazy to say, but it, you know, it was like weird, like inner galactic parasites living in my eyes and my skin and my tissues. And, you know, I would
Hmm.
just get in these like crazy, just, it was just insanity. It was
Oh,
just, I was
and
out
I
of my mind.
just to put your mind at ease here, you're in good company. You know, like I remember day 3 would roll around and I would see bugs crawling everywhere. And you know, my wife Donna, she's off. Well, she's usually co-host of the show here. She can talk about. She used to call it the evil, which was like what you're saying. Like there's parasites in the drywall and there's parasites here, and like we actually had an exterminator come in one time and to look at like what's this in the drywall, and he comes and he looks at it and he's like, there's no charge for today's business, but there's nothing here.
Yeah.
So
A
I
funny
get it.
story. So, you talking about the exterminator, a funny story I have with my parasite thing is, I was so convinced that these parasites were just like living in the carpet. This was when I was still sometimes staying at my parents' house, and I thought these parasites were just like living in the carpet and like just everywhere, you know. And I didn't want to go in my room because I'm like, I go in my room and they're just gonna engulf me. So I
Yeah.
remember this one specific time I was just in some crazy delusion, and I got like a bunch of uncooked hot dogs, and I like stabbed a bunch of like holes in all these uncooked hot dogs, and I was just soaking them in Raid bug spray,
Uh-huh.
and I just had these hot dogs soaking in bug spray, and I just remember like going around the corner, like looking into my bedroom and like tossing these hot dogs into my bedroom, just completely out of my mind. Just
Parasites
thinking
like hot
like,
dogs, you thought, or what?
what part of my delusion was that the parasites liked other foods, so
Uh-huh.
it was it's a whole I don't know how in detail you want to get with my insanity, but
Yeah, well, that's
yeah,
that's
it
a
was
that's a
crazy.
good glimpse. We've got Clean and Sober Nation in the chat here. Good to see you again this morning. Let's see. Clean and Sober Nation says, when I smoked meth, I saw tons of tree people, got clean and they all moved out. Today, I am a tree hugger. Thanks for the comment there, Susan. That's a full circle story right there. That's amazing. So we used to do all kinds of crazy things. Donna and I, we graduated from fentanyl to methadone, and then we got kicked off the methadone because we were on meth. And when we got onto meth, man, that's when things went real sideways for us. There was lots of crazy shit that was happening. So,
Well, there's another story. I was just to paint a picture of my mental state at the time, but so I had this weird thing that the parasites like liked food, so I would like hold food, like I'd get like a bunch of bologna and put it in my hands and like run up to my mom and sister, and I'd be like, hey, I would be like, look, you guys don't see that, you guys don't see that, like holding like a thing of bologna, and they're like looking at me like
holy
just like
cow.
what is wrong with this guy.
Yeah.
So I remember one time it was probably like 3 a.m, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm staying at my parents' house. Probably not supposed to be there, but I'm at my parents' house, and like I have this thing with like meats and food and the parasites, and I'm in up for how many days, who knows, and I'm in my kitchen, and I'm like doing my weird meat psychosis thing, and I open up the freezer, and I'm like, there's just like a bunch of raw meat in there, raw steaks or whatever. And I'm like,
Oh
oh,
no.
this is what I need. This is gonna solve the problem. So I end up defrosting all this raw meat, and I'm like, dude, I have it everywhere. Like I need a serious, parasite cleansing, So I take all this raw meat, and I go into the bathroom, and I turn on the shower, and I take all this raw meat with me into the shower. So now
Wow.
I'm like in my bathroom, like with all this raw meat, like just all over. I'm in the shower, like with all this, and this is probably a nasty story, but I'm like in the bathroom, and it's like 3 a.m. probably. I'm taking a shower, and I have this raw like handfuls of steaks, and I'm just rubbing raw meat all over my body, and I'm like freaking out. Well, I'm freaking out, so I get out of the shower, I get dressed, and I leave, and I'm gone for knows how many other days. But my mom wakes up in the morning
Uh-huh.
and goes into the bathroom, and there's just blood and flesh and chunks of flesh and all over the
Wow.
bathroom, and there's no explanation for that except there's been a murder. It was like it was just so she thought I had like killed someone or something and had come to the house, and
Wow.
until she put the pieces together and saw the raw meat in the kitchen and like saw what was going on, and it kind of explained a little
Yeah.
bit that
So what was it then? Like that's wow. That okay, you win. You win the messed up story fight. So we're gonna get into what brought you into recovery, and you've been in recovery for 12 years now, and we're gonna get into all that and how you stay sober even through the hard times in recovery. But before we do, I'm just gonna shout out today's sponsors, and then we'll get back at it. Sound good?
got it.
Here we go. All right. EHN Canada is Canada's leading provider of mental health and addiction services, providing evidence-based and medically assisted care with 1-year wraparound services for those suffering from substance use disorder. To learn more, find their link in the show notes. Pine Lodge, the treatment center I went to 7 years ago when I got sober, offers inpatient addictions treatment and aftercare programming in Regina, Saskatchewan. To inquire about services or to make a donation, call 306-510-1800. 91. Are you affected by someone else's substance use? Family and friends can be okay and do recover. Nar-Anon can help. Contact Ronnie at 306-731-7573 for meeting information. Wellness News, Choice for Healthy Living, is a local resource that works to connect people to health and wellness related products, services, and expert advice from industry professionals, locally allowing us to connect and engage. Check out wellnessnews.ca or skwellnesshub.ca today to learn more. And a special shout out to the Prairie Grazer here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. They catered our recent housewarming celebration and they did a fantastic job. Their grazing tables kept us going for hours and I never stopped finding new things. Delicious food, beautiful conversation piece, easy to work with, 10 out of 10, highly recommend. To reach out to them, find their link in the show notes. To make contact or learn more about today's sponsors, check out our new merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are also in the show notes below. So, holy cow. Okay, so that is probably the most graphic story that we've heard for a while.
Oh, it's graphic, man. And
it
wasn't like an isolated, that particular situation was an isolated situation, but that type of behavior and that type of delusion was not isolated. It was all day, every day, 365. Like I was in a state of paranoia and delusion and like extreme behavior, you know, for years it was like that, which obviously that's going to play, to go back to what you're saying, that's going to play a large role in the clues that I have a problem.
Yeah. Hang on one sec here. We got one more comment. I always love celebrating clean time when I see it in the chat. Lana Marie, thank you so much for joining us today. Lana says, I am a recovering addict. I am a recovering addict. I have 3 years since my last rehab and won the war, but the battle against my addiction never ends. Thanks for being here today,
Congrats,
Lana.
Lana.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining us and sharing that with us. It matters. So tell us, what brought you into recovery? Was it one final incident that sort of like kicked you in the head, or what was it?
It was just compounding over time. So I mean, like I said, I had the psychosis, and then my body got to a point where I couldn't even walk around the streets anymore. My back was just so messed up, and I just was so malnourished and dehydrated all the time. And I was in and out of jail for years. Since 16, 17 years old, I started going to juvie and then jail, and it seemed like every 3 months I was in jail. Then I was staying somewhere. I was squatting. I was staying with some lady and her daughter who were strung out, and my paranoia got so bad they ended up leaving their own apartment because I wouldn't leave. And then I was squatting in this apartment. Then I ended up getting kicked out of the apartment, and I was back on the street. And then I was on the street. I ended up robbing my parents' house where they had a restraining order on me, and I went to their house and popped open a window and robbed their house. And I got arrested that day. And I got arrested, and when the cop got me, I had 9 warrants at the time, and then the new charge, which was whatever it was, residential burglary was the initial charge, which they ended up dropping it to possession of stolen property. So that was my 10th charge. So I went to jail, and I ended up getting sentenced to do 3 months. So it was 90 days in county jail. They just ran all my charges concurrent. So now I'm in jail, and I have 2 choices. You know, I could either be in jail with the mind state, I'm just going to get out and do the same thing that I was doing, or I'm going to sit in jail for those 3 months and look inward on myself and start figuring out what my problem is and what I can do to mitigate that once I get released. Because I had done jail time before, and in jail I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do drugs when I get out, period.
Yeah,
no internal, no no internal work. I didn't think I had to like figure out triggers or figure anything out within myself. I thought I could just say, "Oh, I'm not going to do drugs when I get out," and then get out, and everything was going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I'd do a month or two, and I'd get out, and within 3 days, I'd be using again.
Yeah.
So I had the trials and the errors of sober time in jail, not sticking or succeeding in that. So this last time I was like, I got 3 months to try to figure out what's going on within my own head that's going to help me stay sober when I get out.
Yeah.
So I was in those, I made that decision pretty soon when I was in jail. Like, okay, let's take this opportunity to figure some things out and get sober. So, I was in jail, and it started with, I would repeat these mantras that I would come up to myself. You know, those were on like the early, you know, week one, where my central nervous system's just still absolutely shot. You know, like the ability to like just recall ideas or count to 10 was hard for me because my brain was so dissolved, you know, from these years of abusing drugs. So it just started, I would just lay in bed, and I started counting to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, I would count to 10, and then from there I would repeat these like positive affirmations to myself, like I'm healthy, I'm going to stay sober, I'm happy,
I don't have parasites.
And I don't have parasites. Yeah. So I would just repeat these things over in my head over and over. And then I started working out. So then I would work out every morning in jail, you know, and I'd repeat these mantras. And then I ended up getting a book from someone called The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're aware of that book. It's an awesome book. And as soon as I started reading this book, I was like, oh, this book found me when it was supposed to find me, in the place it was supposed to find me. And I just became obsessed with this book. And I would read this book. I would repeat these mantras. I would work out every day. I started feeling better. My cognitive and emotions came back, you know. Read these books, take notes. There was some other literature in there I found helpful, you know. There was a Bible in there. There was the NA big book was in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be reading all these books, just like taking notes. Like I was taking, like in jail, like reading these books, like taking notes and meditating and clearing my thoughts and going inward in myself, like as if I was going to be tested on this stuff. Like I was dedicated to figuring something out about myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I did those 3 months, and I got out, and I was just fully committed to staying sober, by whatever means. You know, I had ran into other issues upon release other times that I knew to look out for this time. You know, like a big trigger for me is women and drugs. That's like my
drugs
my
are a
bread and
massive
butter.
trigger.
Yeah. So before I would get out and I'd have some clean time from jail, and I'd be like, oh, well, you know, my problem's drugs, not the women that do drugs. So I'd go and hang out with these chicks who are strung out on meth still. And then, I mean, what did I think's going to happen, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had some lessons learned, and when I got out that time, the first thing I did was I got a gym membership. And I tell people that to this day, people who are trying to get sober or newly sober, the first thing I always tell people is you need to get physically active. Like you need to get your body moving, especially if you've been abusing it for so long. Like you need to get the blood pumping. You need to get your brain functioning properly again. It also helps set up a routine in your life. And it also starts giving you motivation, and you see changes in the physical form, which helps you get motivated that something is changing, you know.
Yeah.
And the gym hits all those things, you know.
Yeah.
Dopamine and all of it, you know.
So what was it like when you came out of jail, your thoughts cleared and you start remembering or maybe your loved ones start telling you about these things that you did, like your meat shower there and stuff like that. How was that to deal with when you were early in recovery and you started to like realize how much harm you'd done?
Probably the only thing that affected me emotionally, like I know I did some up stuff in my addiction
Mm-hmm.
that negatively affected a lot of things. But one of the only things that actually would emotionally move me in a bad way was the thought of what I was putting my parents through with
Yeah.
because my parents, they were waiting for a phone call every night.
Yeah.
Like they were waiting for that phone call. Hey, we found Jimmy dead behind a dumpster. Like it was that was the next thing, or Jimmy's going to do life in prison, because my crimes had just gone to, big boy crimes that I was committing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something to deal with. But I do remember probably sometime the first few weeks of getting out of jail, I had started going to the gym already. I was still like dealing with emotional situations within myself, and obviously I didn't have any skills. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. I didn't have I couldn't even told you a top 40 song in the past 5 years. I was so
Mm-hmm.
disconnected from regular society. And I remember sitting in my living room with my parents, and just like my heart was still bothering me, my back was just in pain still. And I just remember breaking down out of like almost like defeat, like, and just having just like falling onto the floor and just like crying, and then just sitting there with my parents. And I was just in like a hysterical state. Like, I don't know if I could do this. I feel like I did so much damage in every aspect of my life, whether it was socially or economically and health wise,
Yeah.
spiritually. Like I had
Yeah.
just spent so much, 10 years of my life abusing drugs, just completely destroying every aspect of my life, that I just couldn't see how I was going to climb out of that darkness, even at that point with almost 4 months clean.
Mm-hmm.
Just like sanity just seems so far away still. Like
Yeah.
functioning and succeeding in life just seems so far still.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kept you in it then? You mentioned before the show that you don't really identify as a stepper, like as a program guy or whatever, but you did say that you still like go to meetings. I don't know how often or whatever, but like that was a thing for you. But early on, and for anyone out there who might be listening and is early on, what was it? I mean, if you broke down and you didn't know what to do, how did you keep putting one foot in front of the other?
I think uh, with that question, I think a lot of times it's people's responses to that is oversimplified. In my opinion, I can't speak too much about the program because I
Mm-hmm.
haven't done the step work. But from other people talking about staying sober, a lot of times I'll hear their explanation of it, and I'm like, that
That,
that that answer you just gave is so simplified that
yeah,
it's not going to help anyone. Like the reality of it is so complex, and there's so many moving pieces to it, that for at least for myself, that attributed to my ability to stay sober. I can't say like, um, oh well, I just went to
trusted my higher
meetings,
power.
or I trusted my higher power. Like it
Yeah.
it was a collection of things that I did that helped me stay sober. And like for starts, like I was saying, like staying physically active
Yeah.
was a big part of me getting sober and being able to maintain my sobriety from July 20th 2012, my sober date, until today. Staying physically active is a key thing in my sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that helped me, because I realized I actually had to implement something into my thought process that was going to keep me from doing drugs. It wasn't just going to be environmental. It wasn't just going to be knowing better. It wasn't just going to be a moral level. I actually had to implement something into my process of thinking to keep me from using drugs. And for me, what that looked like was I had an issue with impulse control and drug use the other times I had tried getting sober. So I would I call it, I would have drug daydreams where I would have some sober time from being in jail or whatever. And I would start having these drug daydreams where I'd be sitting there and I would imagine getting the money, and I would imagine getting the dope. I would imagine who I would call for it. I'd imagine getting the pipe. I would imagine putting the neck of my pipe in the bag and packing the bowl. And I would imagine melting it down and looking at it, and and the taste and the feeling, and how it would give me butterflies. And then I would imagine going on a mission and going to the hotel with the girls and the sex, and then the crime. And I wouldn't control those thoughts. I would allow these thoughts, because to me, I'm like, they're not actions, they're just thoughts. So I would let these thoughts run freely in my head, like, oh, well, I can't do drugs, but I could think about them. So I would just, the thoughts would escalate and I would go into these daydreams. Well, what would happen when I would go into these daydreams is they would turn into actions. So I would be like, oh, I want that right now. I want that so bad. So what I learned about myself was, when I would find that I would start entertaining these drug daydreams, I would have to replace them with an active reality daydream. So instead of going down that thing where it starts with like thinking about getting the bag and thinking about packing the bowl, and I would have to stop myself in my tracks at the beginning of those and literally replace that daydream with a different one of the truth. So I would go, oh, okay, so I'm thinking about drugs, I'm thinking about picking up a bag. Okay, well, I pick up the bag, I get high, I get paranoid, I commit crimes, I get caught for the crimes, I end up getting kicked out of where I'm staying, I end up malnourished and I get sick, I end up robbing a house, or I end up with these delusions. My parents kick me out, I get a restraining order violation. So I literally had to replace those daydreams about getting high with the reality, and not just what I want to believe it was. And that was probably, honestly, the key to my ability to stay sober, was in those moments where those thoughts first arise, being able to stop the thoughts, knowing what it's going to lead to, and replacing it with the truth and not a fantasy. And that, once I learned that, it became second nature. I no longer had to stop myself and think of it being a fantasy and replacing it. The truth of my addiction became my impulse. So if drugs like popped up, like, oh, I want to use drugs or drink a beer, I no longer had to be like, hold on a second. It just automatically, my thought process went to, well, I can't do that because this is what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, I mean, that's a great tool. But at some point, did it turn away from that? Because I mean, it sounds to me like early on you would have these daydreams, and then you would be stuck in this awful scenario where things went totally wrong. And like, that's not a very good way to spend your day either, right? Like, we don't want to stay in that forever. What was it like for you coming away from that? Now, you said it became second nature. Was there a point where you started replacing those thoughts with positive things, like with things like, okay, I can't do drugs because I'm doing these amazing things? Like, what did that transition look like?
I'm an artist, so that was part of what I was doing at the time too. I was able to create art again.
Okay.
I was able to make connections with healthy people
Mm-hmm.
who were normal people who had jobs and lived inside, and and
Didn't have meat showers very often.
yeah, meat showers. Um, and then I got a job and I started saving up some money. I was able to get a car again. I met a girl, and I was getting in shape. My body was transforming. My delusions were gone. My ability to control my emotions started getting better and better, which resulted into more happiness. So there was nothing. There was nothing in my sobriety that was negative. It was all on a upward trajectory. So yeah, everything and then just motivation to succeed. Like the motivation to succeed in life, especially coming from below baseline.
Mm-hmm.
I was below the starting point where everyone else starts at. I was at negative 30% success. So that gave me a motivation. I was like, well, let's see what I can achieve in life.
Mm-hmm.
And sobriety was going to be the only way that I was going to be able to achieve anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I that became a motivating factor also. Like, I want to see what I can make out of this life that I've absolutely destroyed.
Mm. And when did it start? Now you said, life went on an upward trajectory. Do you remember the first time that you maybe had the thought like, wow, my life is really good, and we're actually able to experience that gratitude?
That's something I've always struggled with, is practicing gratitude.
Mm.
And it's not a proud character trait that I have, but it definitely is a character trait.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say I have the disease of more, where what I have, I never take the time to stop. I mean, there's glimpses, there's minutes, there's seconds, but I have an issue taking the time and stopping and seeing what I have and appreciating it and being grateful for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that's somehow tied into my sickness as an addict.
Mm-hmm.
Is always wanting more, which has fueled my success also, but has probably also been detrimental to my overall happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been moments, success, I think, looks different to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So one person, I think, can find gratitude in just being emotionally healthy,
Mm-hmm.
and another person needs to own a giant house.
Yeah.
I typically would always find myself in just always being in that trajectory, and
I can
not
relate.
taking time to.
I can
Yeah,
relate.
I mean,
And
I don't want to make this a therapy session.
no. It's okay. It's okay. But I can relate. As I started this podcast, for example, I started to really notice that same thing that you're talking about in my life, where I would come to a milestone, like, oh, I got this many followers, or oh, I got this many watch hours, or this many down, or whatever, whatever success that I would find. As soon as I achieved that, I got the nice microphone or whatever, I would already want more. It's like that just led me to believe that the gift isn't in the things. It's not in the destination. It's not I've reached this milestone, this milestone, this milestone. The gift is in the journey. That's where the true
Yeah.
gift of life is. And for me to sit here and say like, oh well, I'm just going to use your words, and because I relate so deeply to what you just said. What I'm learning is like, oh, I have the disease of more. Well, that's typically how a lot of people describe the disease of addiction, if you believe the disease model. But for me, I'm starting to learn like that's a human condition thing. And that's just, I'm learning to be grateful for the struggle in that way, because that's where I feel fulfillment, is when I'm trying to achieve things. When I recently bought this, like we bought a home and we moved into, I was able to build a bigger studio and all of the things, and I'm so grateful for that. But when that happened, I got depressed because I lost who I was. I was the guy that was getting these things. I was the guy that was fighting towards these things. And when I got them, I didn't know who I was anymore. And that affected me very negatively for a short while. Now I have come to find new mountains to climb and new obstacles and all of the things. But, can you buy into that? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, 100%. And it goes to something that is almost a universal lesson that you're taught your whole life that you refuse to accept until you're there. The big one being money doesn't buy happiness.
It truly doesn't.
Everyone knows that saying. Everyone's been taught that saying. Everyone's been told that from people who've experienced, but you think it's bullshit until you experience it for yourself, And I'm grateful for the situation I found myself in financially and all that stuff, and being able to provide for myself and finding success in that part of life. But it's not there. The thing you're looking for isn't there. Unless you're happy, and even hearing myself say this, I feel like, how many times have you heard someone say this, and how many people don't listen? But until you're happy with who you are, and until you're happy with what you already have, you're going to obtain these things and climb this ladder financially or socially or whatever it is. And you're going to figure out that person that you were before and how you felt before, whether it's positive or negative, is the same person who's going to meet you there at those levels of, and it's just,
well, and
I can't stress enough to people that don't look for happiness somewhere other than where you already are right now, because it's not there,
Yeah. Well, and something that I've come to also realize is that in that climb for success in recovery or in healing and all that you want, whether, like you mentioned, whether that's a big house or lots of friends or whatever, you miss out on the life that you already have. Because you're so focused on something somewhere else that you're missing the gifts that you have right now. Odds are everyone out there watching today, like if you're in recovery and you've been fighting that good fight and you've been having success, your life is probably already good, and you're depressed because it's not something else and you're missing where you're at right now in this present moment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. And that's what the goal, like you were saying a second ago, the goal always changes. The person who's sitting there listening today, that's like, something's not right about my life. I don't have it. I don't feel happy. I need $20,000, a car, and a girlfriend. Well, let me give you a spoiler alert. You get that $20,000, you get that car and that girlfriend, and there's something else that's going to take your attention now that you don't have. There's never a point where you reach a level of success or a level of material, obtaining material things. There's never a point where that void is filled. It's always pushed on to something bigger, something nicer, something that you don't have. Oh, I have the money and I have the girl now. I wish I had the time. And now you have the time. Well, now I wish I had this. It's always, the void isn't filled with materials or success. The void is filled by learning to appreciate life and going inward and practicing gratitude and being present in the moment. And I say that not from someone who's mastered the ability to do that. I'm not going to sit here and lie and be like, I'm a monk. I don't need anything. I'm just happy. I sit here every day and meditate and the nothingness, and I'm happy. It's something I struggle with all the time. I just know that's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah. So you recognize it now.
Yeah, I recognize it. Yeah. And it took me to get to that point of, and like I said, I don't want to ever sound ungrateful for the opportunities that I've been given, but it took me to that point of making X amount of dollars and achieving X amount of success and buying my house with my swimming pool and buying the car and the new truck and all these things, it took me having to actually do those things to realize that those things weren't the answer to my problem.
Isn't that interesting that we did the same thing with drugs? We had to go to that place to realize that that's not the solution. And we found hardship just the same, both in addiction and in success. Isn't that
Yeah, and I think that
interesting?
has to do with the addict mind.
Yeah.
The addict mind is the addict mind, whether it's the obsession with money and material possessions, or whether it's the drugs or another beer or another hit. You know, I feel like the mind is processing both of these events identically. They're just it's just processing these events to different things. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I often say that, you know, the addicted mind it can be a very, very useful tool. Like, we all just want to feel better, right? I don't know that that's an addiction thing. I think that's a human condition thing, you know.
Yeah.
But those of us who have this sort of compulsion to get there at by any means necessary, we need to learn how to harness that, or else we'll end up in, like, you know, like you were just mentioning, you got all of the things, the house and all of the, but still nothing inside has changed. And maybe you can tell us what, was there any like moments that you came to that realization, like you reached a level of success and then you sat down in your house and looked at your car or whatever, and shit, I'm still not happy. Like, do you remember those moments?
An exact moment, no. I mean, there's the little moments, you know, the obvious ones where you pick out the house, you know, you save the money, you get the house, you go through escrow, and like you said, like the road is fun, you know, because you think you think you're gonna get to something, you know. So then you get your house. I mean, I get my house and I'm excited, and it seems like everyone else is more excited for me than I am actually feeling. Like, oh, dude, you're getting a house. Like, oh, dude, this and that, you know.
You
But
made it. You made
um,
it. You made it out. You know,
yeah,
did
and
I?
then yeah, and then you walk in that house, you know, and you get the keys, and you know, you're sitting there in your house, and you're like, I'm still just me.
Yeah. And the
Now
house
I'm just
feels
me in
empty.
this big house.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just anywhere you go, you're just yourself, and if you don't change yourself, you're just yourself with those things, you know.
Mm-hmm. So have you done any kind of work around that? Now, I meant, you know, when we were talking earlier, you had to change your thoughts, right? So you were having these daydreams about drugs, and you'd go down this drug rabbit hole and all of the things, and that would, you know, you recognize that would lead you to relapse. Now, being farther into recovery now, are you starting to recognize those patterns when it comes to your successes as well?
My mind, when I don't pay attention to what my mind is doing, or I'm not conscious, my mind just goes into its default state, which to me appears to be just discontent.
Mm,
Like I just go into on all levels, large or small. Like I'm like, oh, I need to hit my vape. I need a coffee. I need to go to the gym. I need to figure out something with money. I need to do this. Like I and it's just like the financial success thing. Like you're chasing this thing with there's you can't fill the void with those things.
mm-hmm.
Like to fill that void is to go the opposite direction into yourself and sit in silence and practice gratitude and practice appreciation for what you already have, you know. So it's a constant thing for me, you know. It's a moment to moment, day to day thing that I have to practice. It's not like a realization you come to and then it's solved.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Let's just cap it there, man. That was a great talk. Thanks so much
Awesome.
thanks so much for joining us today. Maybe we'll have you back someday. And is there anything that you want to say before we let you go?
I'd say my final words would be all right, just words of wisdom. Life never stops happening. You're gonna have things that don't go the way that you want them to go. Whether it's financial stuff or girl stuff or emotional stuff. All this shit's going to continue to happen to you. But the thing that you have to remember is if you try to solve those problems by using substances or alcohol or whatever it is, those problems don't go away. They just get amplified by 1,000. So if you ever get to those points where you're trying to solve your problems by using drugs, just remind yourself that those problems are still going to be there. And now you're just going to have another problem to add on to them.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks so much for joining me today, Jimmy. I'll let you go.
All right,
no,
Daniel.
whoa. I can't believe we just about forgot to do this. Where can people find you? You have a following. Where can people find your content?
Yeah. You could find me on Instagram at Whoamyou, WHOAMYOU. You could find me on Apple Music or Spotify. My music is also same name at. I'm a painter. If you're interested in any art, just contact me on Instagram, or if you need to contact me for any reason, I'm usually pretty good at responding to direct messages.
Awesome. Okay, we'll cap it. Thanks so much, Jimmy. Take care for now.
All right, Daniel. Have a good day, buddy.
Yeah. Okay, if you got anything out of that, please hit that like button. Leave us a comment. We really like to hear your thoughts. We are trying to foster productive conversations about substance use. I think we did that today. Let us know what you thought. Leave us a comment. You can also reach out to me, Daniel at hardknockstalks.com. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. That's all I got. Thanks so much. Take care.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.